Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Acting Sergeant Sandasha Bao, a Media Relations Officer with the London Police Service. Today, we will be sharing information in relation to Project S.A.F.E, a recent months-long project involving LPS members as well as external agencies and services. We ask that you please hold all your questions until the end of the conference, at which point I will go over a few housekeeping items. I would now like to welcome Chief Tai Trung, who will commence the press conference with opening remarks. Chief.
Thank you, Sandasha. So, first of all, thank you for coming, everybody from the media today. I just want to recognize and acknowledge Chair Ali Shabar, who's here today, who's seated to my right at the front here, and Mayor Josh Morgan, who took the time out of his day to be here as well. It speaks volumes to us to know that the chair and the mayor are here to not only to support our organization, but they're also here to support the community. So thank you for being here today. We're going to be sharing the results of Project S.A.F.E. This project, this investigation, this initiative commenced in April of this year. It's a multi-jurisdictional investigation. It involved multiple partnering agencies, which you see here today, seated to my left. And there's some agencies that I'll mention that are not here today that were also involved. And this really started to address, it was a result of our organization addressing the increase in shootings that occurred earlier in this year. So I also want to take this moment to recognize the leadership team that was in place at the time when the city was facing the shootings. So then Acting Chief Trish McIntyre and Acting Deputy Chief Paul Reynolds, who's here today as well. Paul was responsible for operations at the time, and under their leadership, this investigation was supported. Since June of this year, Deputy Chief Bastien has taken over as the deputy in charge of operations. And I will tell you that with his leadership, the support continues in this organization for investigations such as this and future initiatives. So there really is no question that access to illegal firearms and that gun violence that often results are a growing concern not only to the city of London, but across our province and across Canada. Illegally trafficked guns are making their way into Canada and into our communities through sophisticated and organized channels, so ultimately ending up in the hands of criminals. And this is the problem that we face, which poses a great danger to our community. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Detective Inspector Chris Cherney. He's going to share the results of Project S.A.F.E. But before I do that, I want to take a moment to thank the many agencies, the partner agencies, who worked with us here at the London Police Service and throughout this extensive investigation. So, present here today to my left, I'd like to welcome and thank Detective Inspector Lee Fulford from the Ontario Provincial Police, Inspector Mark Burnett of the Greater Sudbury Police Service, and Josh Newby, Director of Canada Border Services Agency's Ontario Firearms Smuggling Enforcement Team. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I'd also like to thank our partners from the Hamilton Police Service, United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, FinTrack, the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, Correctional Service of Canada, and the Ministry of the Attorney General and the Ministry of the Solicitor General for their assistance in this project. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the incredible work done right here in our organization by our Criminal Investigation Division under the leadership of Detective Inspector Chris Cherney, who's going to speak more about the support that he's giving and this organization gives to the members to keep our city safe. And before I welcome Detective Inspector Cherney, I will say that enforcement strategies to address gun violence are critical to keep cities, and they're a priority for us here at the London Police Service. But just as important to us is crime prevention, community trust, and preventative strategies that focus on our children and our youths. If we're going to ensure the safety and well-being of our community, we need to really look at the future of this city, and we need to really focus preventative strategies on our children and youths. That's the only way we're going to be able to achieve community safety. I will now welcome Detective Inspector Chris Cherney so that he can share the tremendous results of this investigation with everybody here. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Chief, thank you for those remarks. On behalf of all involved in the project, we really appreciate it. And thank you to the folks here today, some of whom I know traveled distances to come. It's much appreciated. You know, when somebody takes their water bottle up to the podium, it can be a bit of foreshadowing that they have a lot to say. So I don't think I'm going to disappoint in that regard. I hope you're all seated comfortably. So, as introduced, my name is Chris Cherney, and I'm the Detective Inspector of the Organized Crime and Support Branch here at the London Police Service within our Criminal Investigations Division. As the Chief mentioned in his remarks, Project S.A.F.E was supported by our law enforcement partners within Ontario and into the United States. These collaborations are not unique to this project or enforcement projects in general, but are the necessary components of everyday policing and intelligence gathering. I'm going to get into the details of Project S.A.F.E shortly, but first, I also wanted to acknowledge some teams here at the LPS. As I will outline, Project S.A.F.E addressed gun violence from a few different angles, and as such, on the investigative end, we brought together members from our Guns and Gangs section, investigative support section, criminal intelligence, major crimes, forensic identification, members from our uniform division, and our civilian analysts and digital forensics technicians. I see that there are a number of members from some of the involved teams in attendance here today. However, I think it's worthwhile and very important to me to mention that there are many more who aren't. Those are the members that even if they were able to make it here today, they perform the kind of behind-the-scenes investigative and covert work that restricts them from being publicly present at events like these. When it comes to combating organized crime and gun violence, we rely heavily on these officers. They work around the clock, 7 days a week, often traveling throughout Ontario away from their families and their homes. They are essential to collecting evidence and performing tasks that bring investigations and projects like these closer to holding criminals to account. Their work may be behind the scenes and away from public view, but I can state unequivocally that their efforts provide the foundations for these types of investigations. On the flip side, from the visible enforcement perspective, I would be remiss not to mention the tireless support of our emergency response unit and incident commanders. These officers embody professionalism and excellence in training and performance. They are the ones who were always there to ensure the safety of our officers, of the public, and of the accused persons when we needed to make an arrest or execute a high-risk search warrant. I'm going to move on now, and I'll do my best to outline Project S.A.F.E. As you will see, this project had a few different components that I'll tie together for those of you here and those watching online. Sometimes the best way to explain something is to tell a story, so that's what I'm going to do. The story of Project S.A.F.E, as you will see, has a beginning and develops into a few chapters. However, it is fitting to point out that it does not have an end, and I think that's important to note. When it comes to combating gun violence and firearms trafficking, the work must continue, and it does. I'm going to take you all back to February 2nd of this year. Members of our Investigative Response Unit arrested 24-year-old Londoner Dylan Crawford on outstanding warrants. At the time of his arrest, he was found to be in possession of 9 handguns. Based on the evidence, it was our belief that he had these firearms for the purpose of trafficking them. He was charged with a number of criminal offenses in relation to illegal firearms possession and firearms trafficking. As February rolled into March of this year, the investigation into the source of those firearms continued. Also, by March 1st, London had already experienced 7 public shootings or firearms discharges. I want to be very clear. Every single firearm discharge causes us great concern. Each incident has the potential to kill or seriously injure someone. Each one is unacceptable, but 7 in 2 months was a reckless and dangerous way to start 2023 in our city. On the heels of these shootings and the alarming 9-gun seizure from one person, planning for Project S.A.F.E commenced in early March and went operational at the beginning of April. To be honest, it can be daunting for us charged with public safety when you consider the proliferation of illegal firearms in our communities. I'd be naive to suggest that we could accurately state how many illegal firearms there are out there and how many continue to come across our borders. But what I do take comfort in, however, is the shared passion that our teams here at LPS and within our law enforcement partner agencies have toward maximizing our resources and intelligence sharing capabilities. And Project S.A.F.E utilized these partnerships and analytical expertise to drive our focus and efforts towards those who we know are most likely to cause or be involved in gun violence. In essence, we've focused our efforts as much on engaging in interactions with known gun offenders to disrupt their illegal activities as we did to conduct investigations to locate and seize illegal firearms. Project S.A.F.E had 3 distinct strategies, but were linked by the common cause of targeting known offenders to either gather evidence to arrest and lay charges or disrupt their operations. I'll speak to those aspects in a moment. However, overall, I can share that through the efforts of our members and partners, 70 people were arrested and charged criminally. In total, 550 charges under the Criminal Code, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, and the Customs Act were laid. I'll break that down a little bit further. Out of those 550 charges, 360 of them were firearms related. 84 were related to drugs, 39 to breaching court-ordered release conditions, and 67 were for a variety of other types of offenses. We executed 26 search warrants during Project S.A.F.E, 24 in London and 2 out of town. Project S.A.F.E seized 26 illegal firearms, many of which are on display here today. Of those, 22 were handguns and 4 were long guns. Project S.A.F.E seized illegal drugs with a street value of just over $8.5 million. Many of you here will remember the large-scale illegal cannabis lab on Commissioners Road back in April. Project S.A.F.E officers led that investigation, so roughly $8.3 million of seizures were from there. The remaining seizures throughout the project included cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and various opioids. I can also share with you that out of the 70 people arrested, 33 were already on some form of release from previous criminal charges, 20 of those being for previous firearms or weapons offenses. Separating Project S.A.F.E down into its interrelated elements, I'll first touch upon our proactive and highly visible efforts to interact with known firearms and weapons offenders. To conduct this focused deterrence strategy, we selected and provided relevant training to a group of members from our uniform division who worked with our evidence-based policing unit to conduct bail compliance checks and interactions with people that have a history of firearms offenses. They completed over 100 bail compliance checks. Those who were not abiding by their conditions were arrested and charged accordingly. Those who were compliant at the time were engaged in conversation by our officers to let them know about resources in the community. From these checks and interactions, a total of 20 people were charged with 46 various offenses, the majority of which being for failing to comply with release conditions. Another component of this high visibility approach were that these officers worked with our crime analysts to provide a highly visible police presence at certain locations in London at certain times where data has shown there to be a higher rate of violent crime. The second pillar of Project S.A.F.E was utilizing our resources within the Criminal Investigation Division to gather evidence and go after the firearms and the people possessing them already in our city. Additionally, we often combined the efforts and expertise from members of our Guns and Gangs section, Investigative Response Unit, and Major Crimes section to fully investigate each instance of a firearms discharge in London. I can state that their efforts contributed to the overall Project S.A.F.E results by charging 45 individuals with a total of 403 criminal offenses, 290 of which were related to firearms. They seized 12 firearms, 8 of which were handguns, and 4 were long guns. In terms of shooting investigations in London, as of today, we've had a total of 20 firearms discharges in the city. That includes the incident from last Friday on Glenroy Court. Of those, 14 have been solved with charges laid, and the rest remain active investigations. As I mentioned before, we treat each shooting like a potential homicide, because that is the very real danger each time a criminal fires their gun. Most of you will remember the reckless shooting in the Richmond and Oxford area on April 22nd of this year. Officers from our Major Crimes section and Project S.A.F.E led that investigation, culminating in the arrests of 3 involved individuals and the seizure of 2 handguns. I'd like to take this time to also highlight another Project S.A.F.E investigation that fell under this tangent of the overall initiative. Project officers from our Guns and Gangs section came into possession of video evidence from a previous and unrelated investigation that took place outside of London in 2022. They worked with our digital forensics technicians to extract several visual images and videos depicting multiple males handling what appeared to be firearms. We believed at least some of these males to be Londoners. Using various means and a qualified firearms expert, they were able to gather enough evidence to believe that these males were, at the time the videos were made, illegally in possession of firearms. The team worked tirelessly to identify these individuals, and over the course of several months were able to build evidence to lay 277 firearms charges against 5 males. Those males being Emmanuel Ayo, 19 years old of London, Tony McCowie, 28 years old of London, Michael Onan, 20 years old of London, Jamarlee Smith, 21 years old of Toronto, and a male young offender from London. I wanted to bring to light this particular investigation within our project because I think it speaks to the out-of-box thinking that our investigators employed. You know, investigative strategies can often take different routes, and sometimes there's more than one way to arrive at a place where you can hold offenders accountable. As police, we must often weigh the risks of prolonged investigations that may yield significant seizures at the end against the immediate public safety aspect of having known firearms offenders out in our communities with access to guns. This particular investigation is an excellent example of taking available evidence and using it to disrupt a group of firearms offenders in a relatively short period of time, ultimately holding them accountable and putting them in custody. As you folks will remember, I started off my operational remarks about Project SAFE when I spoke about the 9 handgun seizure that occurred back in February and how it was one of the factors in dedicating the substantial resources to this project. We've basically come full circle in my story, and I will finish the investigative highlights with how project investigators honed in on and dismantled a criminal organization that profited on smuggling firearms into Canada from the US. Since Dylan Crawford was found to be in possession of those 9 handguns back in February, investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the other co-conspirators in this firearms importation and trafficking ring. We utilized our internal digital forensics experts to extract and dissect extensive amounts of data on seized devices, which helped shine some daylight on the dark dealings of this group. We partnered with law enforcement intelligence partners from the Ontario Provincial Police, the Hamilton Regional Police Service, Greater Sudbury Police Service, Canada Border Services Agency, Correctional Services of Canada, FinTrack, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, commonly referred to as the ATF. We worked collaboratively to identify the main members in what we believe was a criminal organization that, to put it bluntly, dealt instruments of death into London and across our communities in Ontario. As a result of this work, 5 search warrants were executed on June 20th and June 21st. 1 search warrant was executed in Sudbury, 1 in Hamilton, and 3 in London. Additional evidence, drugs, and 5 handguns, 4 of which were loaded at the time, were seized. 3 handguns were seized from one of the London search warrants, and the other 2 from a residence in Hamilton. During these warrants, on June 20th and 21st, 4 individuals from this smuggling ring were arrested and charged with a multitude of criminal offenses related to firearms importation and trafficking, proceeds of crime, and other offenses related to what police seized on those days. Those charged were S.A.F.E, 30 years old, of Sudbury, Sheldon Hyatt, 31 years old, of Hamilton, Ontario, Shanoa Williams, 23 years old, of London, and Tyrese Cumberbatch, 23 years old, of London. Evidence also showed that Dylan Crawford had been a part of this criminal conspiracy and organization. Now, he was still in custody from the February 2nd arrest and initial charges, but he was further charged jointly with these other accused in relation to the importation and conspiracy to traffic firearms. The investigation continued, and a 6th co-conspirator was identified. So on July 12th, London police investigators traveled back to Hamilton and arrested 24-year-old Brian Hamilton Hyatt and charged him with conspiracy to traffic firearms, possession of firearms for trafficking, possess proceeds of crime, and money laundering. Finally, with some outstanding collaboration and assistance from Correctional Service Canada, there was a 7th person identified as being a participant in this criminal organization. William McDonald, 32 years, who is currently incarcerated in a federal penitentiary, but a former Londoner, was charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit an indictable offense, namely firearms trafficking. What I can say about this individual and his involvement is that our investigators uncovered evidence that while in prison, he conspired with at least 1 other member of the group to traffic and help distribute firearms that had been illegally imported into Canada. I saved this last importation and trafficking component of Project SAFE until the end of my remarks to underscore how integral the collaboration and need for partnerships among law enforcement agencies is. It's been said before, but it merits repeating. Criminals do not adhere to any borders, and hence neither do we. I'll close again by thanking our partners in attendance today and those who could not make it. I know I've covered a lot of ground here, and I appreciate the attention and the interest from our media partners and any members of the public who are watching this or will watch this. On a personal note, I am beyond impressed and proud of the skill, dedication, and professionalism of the sworn and civilian members who worked on Project S.A.F.E. This operation literally involved hundreds of members across numerous police services from its start to finish. Although the work continues to address gun violence, gangs, and organized crime, your efforts have undoubtedly made our communities safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Detective Inspector Cherney. Next, we will hear from Detective Inspector Lee Fulford of the Ontario Provincial Police.
Thank you, Sergeant Bow. Good morning. As mentioned, my name is Detective Inspector Lee Fulford, and I work for the Ontario Provincial Police's Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. As part of this role, I am proud to be the commander of the Provincial Joint Forces Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit. PEW assists with the identification, testing, and verification of seized firearms. PEW also plays an integral role in identifying and taking enforcement action against individuals who are responsible for the illegal trafficking and importation of firearms, which is what brings me here today. As Detective Inspector Cherney mentioned, the prevalence of illegal firearms is increasing in the City of London. This is true for communities across the entire province. The OPP and the London Police Service have been working closely together on a number of investigations to target gun traffickers and remove illegal weapons from the streets. To be clear, the firearms seized in this investigation are not firearms legally obtained by responsible gun owners. They are firearms obtained illegally, which may be used in acts of violence and criminal offenses. Collaboration and information sharing is key to firearms-related investigations. We work closely with our partners in the United States, where many illegal firearms are imported. We also have a member of the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives that is embedded into PEW. Ultimately, our shared goal is to prevent the importation and trafficking of guns. Law enforcement will continue to collaboratively work together to combat crime groups who are exploiting our communities and compromising the safety and security of our citizens. I know I speak for the partners at the table represented here when I say that illegal firearms are absolutely not welcome in our communities. We will strive to do everything possible to eradicate their presence and all of the associated criminality. At this time, I'll pass things back to Sergeant Bell. Thank you.
Thank you, Detective Inspector Fulford. I'll now call Director Josh Newby of CBSA's Ontario Firearms Smuggling Enforcement Team.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us here today. As introduced, I'm Josh Newby, Director of the Ontario Firearms Smuggling Enforcement Team, or OFSET, of the Canada Border Services Agency. The team is made up of intelligence analysts, intelligence officers, and criminal investigators who are dedicated to execute our border enforcement mandate with specialized investigative techniques. I'd like to thank our partners, the London Police Service, Sudbury Police Service, and the Ontario Provincial Police's Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit for working in close partnership with us on Project S.A.F.E. The Canada Border Services Agency is the first line of defense in protecting our country. It is our responsibility to control or stop the importation of firearms, firearms parts, and devices, ammunition, and other prohibited weapons to ensure compliance with the Customs Act, the Criminal Code, and the Firearms Act. Our role on Project S.A.F.E. was to investigate this group in coordination with police partners by providing key border-related intelligence and taking measures leading to the arrests and charges. Following the arrests, The individuals have been charged with smuggling under Section 159 of the Customs Act. Smuggling firearms across the border is a serious criminal offense. The Canada Border Services Agency will continue to investigate, share information, and work closely with our local, national, and international law enforcement partners to protect the safety and security of our communities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Newby. Our last speaker will be Inspector Mark Brunette, Integrated Operations with the Greater Sudbury Police Service.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I turn to Chief, and thank you for this opportunity. And to our media partners, thank you for the opportunity for us to share some of our successes in collaboration. I bring remarks, well, I guess I'll qualify. My name is Mark Burnett. I'm an inspector with Greater Sudbury Police Service. I work as the Divisional Commander of Integrated Operations, as was said. I bring remarks on behalf of partner back home, Inspector Jerry Wilmot, who runs our major crime section. This is a highlight where I think it's very important to showcase community safety and well-being. There's no question it comes in collaboration and partnership with our community members. As was mentioned earlier, crime has no borders. Criminals don't respect borders. And with community safety and well-being and with partnerships with community members comes collaboration and partnerships with law enforcement agencies and other police services. So a success of this project clearly is by virtue of partnerships with both municipal police agencies, provincial police agencies, and federal partners. And with that, we work tirelessly and hard, and we'll continue to work to hold offenders accountable. So with that, as mentioned, I thank media partners to highlight and showcase some of our successes, and we continue to welcome the opportunity to work collaboratively. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector Brunette. We will now take questions from the media. Please raise your hand when called upon. I will ask for your name and media outlet. Let me know who you would like to direct your question to. Unfortunately, Chief Trung has another obligation to get to. However, the remaining panelists will remain and are happy to take your questions. Dale?
It's for Inspector Cherney. Inspector, you mentioned William McDonald, who's serving 2 life sentences for 2 murders. So he was, I don't know if you can speak, so he's essentially part of this gun smuggling ring from prison. He's accessing a cell phone or some sort of other technology and is involved in it?
And, sorry, Inspector Cherney, I'm just asked to repeat the question
Okay.
for everybody else. So we're just looking to ask whether or not William McDonald is...
He's involved in this gun smuggling ring from prison through the use of...
So whether or not he's involved in the gun smuggling ring
Yeah, he
from
just provides
prison?
more info on
Okay,
that.
thank you.
So what I can say, Dale, is you're correct in the identification of the person. I can tell you that through the investigation, we did gather evidence that he was in communication with some of the other members of this organization and helping to distribute some of the firearms once they had made their way into Canada.
Just a follow-up question then.
Sorry,
Yeah.
if you could hold the mic when you're answering the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so what's that like to see a man who's responsible for 2 deaths already in the city, and now he's involved in dealing what you called instruments of death? Like, it's like he's still terrorizing the community from a federal prison.
That's a great question, and it's disheartening enough when you investigate and hold other people to account. It just adds another layer of, I guess, disappointment onto it when you uncover evidence that somebody who has already, destroyed the lives of a couple families and friends is still continuing with this type of illegal behavior.
Inspector.
Do we have, yes, Marshall?
The role of the ATF and their involvement can be expanded on. How were they involved in approaching things?
I'm just going to repeat the question. The role of ATF, how were they involved in relation to Project SAFE?
So our partners in ATF, obviously with the smuggling component, the firearms, their origin is from the States. I won't get into the specifics of the project, but in a general sense, a lot of these firearms are purchased in the States through straw purchasers and then make their way through various means across the border. So in looking at identifying the people who are doing work on both sides of the border, our ATF was our liaison down there. I can tell you that at this time, the charges that have been laid against these people are charges that have been laid in Canada. The investigation on the other side of the border is still very much active and looking for other co-conspirators.
Yes.
So you said that a majority of the drugs that were found were from the cannabis lab in London. The rest of them, were they just like small amounts found during search warrants, or were there any other significant amounts of drugs?
I'm just going to repeat the question again. So you mentioned that the majority of the drugs seized were from a cannabis lab on Commissioners Road. The rest of the drugs were involved in, did you say?
Were they just small?
Were they
amounts
small
found,
amounts?
Or were there another?
Yeah. So I guess relatively speaking, in terms of street value, smaller amounts. However, $200,000 worth of drugs I would consider significant. In terms of individual seizures, you're right that the rest of the drugs seized, when we would go after guns or firearms, a lot of times drugs and guns go together. So there were drugs located during various search warrants or arrests. We would be talking about, in terms of ounces of cocaine here and there, or methamphetamine or fentanyl or opioid tablets.
Yes, Dale.
I guess this question would probably be for the inspector since the chief isn't here. So as the city's seeing this uptick in shootings, the media's asking what are police doing, the public's asking what are police doing. Meanwhile, you guys have this major investigation that you've devoted a ton of resources to, and it's obviously bearing fruit as you go along, but you can't disclose that it's happening. Is that challenging to not tell the public that all this work you're doing? And I mean, you're telling them now, but 2 months ago, after every shooting, people keep saying, "What are you doing?" Is that conflicting for police to not be able to reveal that you're doing so much work behind the scenes to reassure the public?
I really appreciate that. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just in short, was it difficult to not share what was taking place throughout the totality of Project SAFE as things came to fruition?
I appreciate that question, and the short answer is absolutely. Not only am I a police officer here in London, but I'm also a citizen, a father, a community member, and speaking with friends and family members outside of policing, those conversations came up a lot, right? Because people were concerned, and people see the news, right? And to not be able to, give accurate comfort in that moment that, there are things going on. It's one of those things where, it is important to be able to regularly share with the public and our citizens the efforts that are being made. But we've always got to balance that with, protecting the integrity of investigations. So I appreciate your question, Dale, and yes, it was challenging.
Oh, that's one more.
We do have Marshall
Yeah,
has
go
another
for it.
question.
You mentioned that this is not the end, because there is not an end. I guess, why was the decision made now to publicize this, and I guess what's going to be done moving forward regarding the investigation of Project SAFE?
So the question was, why now? Why are we sharing the results now, and what will happen in the future in relation to Project SAFE?
So the decision why now, we felt that we sort of got over that threshold of where the majority of our investigations were, that we could talk about this publicly, and we weren't going to, wreck anything that was on the go. You're absolutely right in that, things will progress, and a lot of the investigations that I spoke about today are still very, very active investigations. But, we're now, July running into August, and it's been a matter of months that these shootings, had happened, and we thought that it was time to provide this information to the public.
Dale?
Another question for the inspector. You mentioned the video from 2022 that led to charges against 5 men. Is this a video posted on social media? Are you able to say it's like a music video? Is it them showing off weapons? Is it public?
And just to repeat, you
Yeah.
mentioned a video in 2022. Can you tell us what that video was?
So it was evidence that was seized by another police service through the course of one of their investigations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a public video? This is
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. If there are no more questions, that concludes today's press conference. Again, thank you all for joining us. Feel free to remain behind and take photographs of any of the seized firearms that we have on display.
And you're sending that release out now?